guys, my name is Anna. I'm so glad to come your way today. It's been a while you guys saw me, I know. Work has been doing a lot with me, yes. But thanks be to God, today I get to come your way and then share the word of God with you. And today is going to be my story, a personal experience, or something that I went through and how God healed me. And today he has opened the door for me to share this message with you. First of all, let me begin by saying that I used not to be a fan of transparency at all. Whenever people come on social media and they are telling or sharing their story, sometimes I feel people give a lot of details. Too much details. There are things that should be between just you and God because of that intimacy you have with him. And I think one of the contributing factors to this was because I wasn't open. Yes, I wasn't open. I have been like that for a long time. Maybe you might say trust issues, but I didn't know how to open up to, I wouldn't say to people, because there are some people, there are certain people that I got into contact with that I was able to open up about certain parts of my life to them. But let's just say transparency was not a thing for me. But you see, being in a relationship with God and being vulnerable with God teaches you how to be fluid with God, to be flexible with God. I never understood how people would pick up their phones and record themselves crying and post it on social media. I'm like, why? Why do you have to come and cry to us? We don't need to see that. Until one day, I'm in God's presence and then God opened me up. Something that I hadn't spoken to him about. He opened me up and then I started flowing because it was something that had hurt me. Somebody did and it hurt me, and then I wasn't talking about it because I thought I would be able to handle it and overlook it. And then God was like, I thought we were friends, like we were cool, we were on that level, so why are you not telling me about this? And then I opened up and then I started crying, and then God said, record it and share it. It felt so weird. I'm like, God, why? And then he said, that is what vulnerability is about. That there are certain parts of you that I would want to impact people with. And I would need you to be vulnerable enough as you are vulnerable with me to share that. And I did that. And I remember after that, I recorded sweet tears of intimacy, being in God's presence and sharing sweet tears of intimacy and crying before God's presence and all of that. And one other reason was that God hadn't opened me up to share this story. One thing I know is that the ministry God has given me includes healing, a healing ministry. But I think this is the time and season where that healing ministry has started. Because after going through everything with this particular issue, I wouldn't say issue, but this particular story I'm going to talk about, God told me that I've opened you up to start using your story or to share your story, to use that for my glory. So here I am. Miss, I'm not too transparent. Here I am being all transparent because you've not known me fully. Yeah, and I think transparency involves that vulnerability for people to know parts of you as God will allow it. So this is how it goes. I grew up knowing or seeing my biological father, I would say, for the first 5-6 years of my life. I don't really remember. I might have been even younger than that. And even with this story, there are this trauma that I'm going to talk about. There are times that I felt it wasn't real or my mind was making things up. But then Because sometimes when you get emotional about something, if you are overly emotional, you can be so overly emotional that your mind will start making things up. So me, I got to a place where I was very honest with myself in life, and I felt maybe my mind was making things up. But what made me know it happened was that I've had flashes of it in the past, and if it wasn't something that really happened, God wouldn't have healed me, or I wouldn't have experienced the symptoms that comes along with it, and God wouldn't have healed me, that I have an experience, I have a tangible experience of its healing. So back to the story, I was talking about how I grew up knowing my father, seeing my father, my biological father, for the first 5-6 years of my life should be. Like I said, I might have even been younger than that. But I never saw him again, and he passed in August 2022. So I never saw him again after that. He was a soldier, he retired early. He and my mother separated when my mother was, pregnant with me. And so I grew up in my grandparents' house. And they were co-parenting. My father would come for me. Some days he would come for me to go spend time with him. I can't remember, it was weekends. I have bits and pieces of that memory, but I can't remember it all because I was young. I was very, very young. So he would come for me, and if you knew me before, thanks to God, I'm not who I used to be anymore. But if you knew me very well before, you would say I'm somebody who had symptoms of OCD. I couldn't stand certain body fluids from people, even sweat. I'm the type that in my country or my local language, people would say, or for Britain people, they would say this person is a bit too precious. I was that type. I couldn't stand certain body fluids. But whenever my dad came for me, I was so happy to be with my father. That my father was an alcoholic. Yes, he was an alcoholic. He would reek or smell of alcohol, but I would allow him use his toothbrush to clean my teeth. That was how bonded I was to my father. And the fact that I didn't like, I never want to come into contact with somebody's brush, even hold it. That was who I used to be. It was that serious. So to be able to tolerate or have my father brush my teeth with his toothbrush, maybe I was young as well, so I couldn't talk about it or I couldn't really process it, but that is how bonded I was to my father. I loved my father so very much, and I would allow him to use his toothbrush to clean my teeth. And it went on. My dad would come for me, all of that. And then my mother remarried, and then there were custody issues because most men, I have realized or I have seen, wouldn't be comfortable with another man taking their place in their child's life. So there was some sort of a fight because my father, wasn't very happy with it. But all this while, I was even living in my grandmother's house. My mom was married, living with her husband. I was living in my grandmother's house. And there was misunderstanding, there was a disagreement. So I was there one day, and then my father stormed, my grandmother's house. And like I was saying, there was a fight. So I was standing in my room, one of our rooms, and then my father came. He came into the house. I think he wanted to take us away. My aunties, some of my aunties, some people that lived with us that weren't really family, but we had considered them family. I remember their faces during that incident or during that moment. And my mom, there was a struggle. And I remember the memory I had, or when it all, I had the entire memory. I could remember everything. I remember my father calling me, but he looked so fierce that I was scared to go to him, because I had never seen him look like that before. This is my father. This is somebody that I'm so bonded to have a love relationship with. I'm talking about my father. You get it? So he was calling me, and I wasn't going because I was scared of the way he looked. I was shocked and then scared. And now that I remember the moment, I remember his face. I could see defeat in his eyes. I could see defeat in his face. He felt defeated that somebody was going to take something that, And he got so angry that I think he had a belt or something, and he threw it at me because he was calling me and I wasn't coming. So he got angry and then threw it. And then my mom and then my aunties, the people in the house, I could see my mom struggling with my father, physical, and then they pushed him out of the room. And that very moment, my mind flashed that memory out. It just flashed out of my mind. That was it. That was how repression and dissociative amnesia, that was how I experienced it. Or growing up to realize that I have had repression, and then dissociative amnesia. So let me explain. I would explain later further for you to understand what dissociative amnesia and then repression is. So dissociative amnesia is memory loss of memory, a memory that was so painful and then so stressful. It was a shock to the brain, it was a shock to the mind. The process with which the memory loss comes about is the repression. This is the state where your brain protects you from a very painful incident by hiding it from your conscious mind. There are 3 states of consciousness of the mind. We have the conscious mind, the subconscious, and then the unconscious. So it's either puts it in the unconscious or the subconscious, I would say. So that is what happened. And dissociative amnesia is a type of a disorder called dissociative disorder. I will explain it all later. So if you have repression and dissociative amnesia, it comes along with symptoms. The umbrella symptom that it comes along with is called brain fog. You see, when there is smoke or there is you are at an event and then there's a smoke machine, you see these smoke machines, sometimes it makes vision blur. You can't really see clearly. So your mind is in that state. There's this fog in your mind. And it's the symptoms that I'm going to talk about, the symptoms that I experienced. The symptoms that I experienced were the umbrella or this brain fog. What comes under it, I experienced throughout my life. I have experienced a low sense of urgency, delayed reaction, difficulty making decisions. I was very, very indecisive. Very, very, not that I can't make decisions, but I struggle making decisions. I think part of it was low self-esteem or low self-worth. So I didn't really know. There was a time in my life that I couldn't decide what I really wanted because I wasn't really confident. You get what I'm trying to say? Yeah. So delayed reactions, low sense of urgency. You can't really speed up with things. You know, somebody who is physically smart, they know how to grab things together. So there were several times my mother would tell me, like, you have a very low sense of urgency. Why is it that you are not hurrying up? You know, you are home, you are doing chores, but you are not really hurrying up as you are supposed to. So there was a time in my life that I remember this woman. She was a friend of my mom. She was a very, very destructive person. I wouldn't say she was a good person, a very bad person. She used to talk about me, and somebody that I can say was really destroying you would say bad things about you, like you are lazy, like you are dull. You get it? So that was it. I was very, very indecisive in such that, in the sense that I couldn't decide between, if I had two options, I couldn't decide if I wanted this or that. Somebody who really jacked me up on that really started making me to be learning how to be decisive is one of my aunties. Her name is Rina Pepra. Shout out to her if she's listening to this message or she comes across it. We would visit her, and then she would be, you know, sometimes she would be cooking, or she would cook lots of meals, or she would make lots of drinks, beverages, and then she would ask, which of these do you like? And then I'll be standing there. I wouldn't know which one to choose. So she would look at me and say, if you don't choose, I will choose what I like for you. You know, she really used to, you know, just jack me up to myself. And then that is when I started realizing I need to learn how to start making decisions. So that was a part of it. I had difficulty concentrating. I struggled with my concentration a lot. I was very, very wild. I was very, very unstable physically. I was playful. I couldn't sit myself down to learn. I really struggled with that when I was young, and then when I was growing up. I easily experienced mental exhaustion. The least mental activity or mental exercise, my mind just gets tired. And one of the things that really made me realize this was true or this was real was that mental exhaustion comes along with migraine. And I think throughout my teenage period, I really struggled with migraines. I had serious migraines. I remember from class 3, class 4, class 5, class 6 up to JSS, going through SHS. I remember whenever it was 3 o'clock, my mind is just tired. I wasn't, you know, you would say that your mind is just tired, but mine was very, very intense. Mine was very, very intense. Whatever that was taught in class, I wasn't grasping it because my mind, I could feel my head was tired. And I didn't really understand. I was too young to, you know, understand what was going on with me. So, parents, if you start seeing a decline in your child's performance, or you start seeing that your child starts becoming dull, you really need to investigate. Sit the child down. Ask the child questions. Investigate things that happened in the early formational stages of their life, because it goes a long way to impact them as they are growing. When I was young, I used to be very, very organized. I was very, very mentally smart, physically smart. Like I was saying, I grew up in my grandparents' house. My aunties were always commending me about that, how smart I was. I would come back from school, put my bag down, wash my socks, do household chores. I remember as young as I was, I think somewhere class 5, class 6, thereabouts, I would wake up at dawn and then I'll be studying. I would sweep, I would prep and then get ready for school. But it got to a time there was a decline. So my mom would complain all the time, you are not performing well, you are not doing well in school. And I thought it was my fault, because that very incident, or that very trauma that I went through, my mind was wounded. My mind was traumatized such that I was very, very wild and stubborn when I was young. Hey, my stubbornness was on another level. It was serious. If you knew me when I was young, you would testify I was a very, very stubborn child. I was very, very wild. Very, very wild though. And the, you know, people who brought me up, or the surroundings I found myself, the elders would always tell me, you're a bad child, you're a bad child, you're a bad child, you're a bad child. So I always thought that my not performing well in school was my fault. If you continually tell a child that he or she is bad. Everything wrong they attribute it to themselves. So I thought that my not performing well in school was my fault. It was because I was a bad child. You get what I was trying to say? I was very, very wild. I will emphasize, I was unstable. You see, when your mind, your brain, I would say your mind, your brain, if it's wounded and traumatized, it's like somebody that has seen something very scary. If you see something scary and then it's like you are in a state of shock. You are like, people are asking you or shaking you. You are in that state of shock. People are asking you like, what went on? What is going on with you? They are shaking you, trying to jerk you back to reality. That was the state my mind was in. My mind was in a state of shock. Like, so it came along with all that symptoms. That's why it was a brain fog. You get what I'm trying to say? Yes. I was very, very worrisome. I was very, very worrisome when I was young. Everybody who knew me would tell you that. But you see, one thing is that let me just chip this in, that I didn't, because I lost that memory, because my brain flashed it out. I lost that memory. Throughout my life and throughout my relationships, there was never a time that because my father was absent in my life, I would say I hated men. No. If anything, there was a void that I wanted to fill. When I was young, I was always around males. I liked males. I was always around males. Not in a bad way, like I liked males, like, you know, I was being naughty or something sexual. No, that wasn't it. But I liked being around males, and I didn't understand until I grew up and I realized that I was looking for somebody to fill that void. I was just looking for somebody to fill that void. And throughout my relationships, there was a reflection of that. Because I hadn't entirely healed, I didn't make the right decisions in my relationships or in the choice of men that or guys that I was in relationships with. Yes. So there was never a time that I would say that I hated men, or in my relationships I was bad with men and then it was a reflection, or it was stemming out of that. No, I wouldn't say that. So let me get to how the memory came back. Like I was saying, I had flashes of it before, but I didn't know what it was. So we went to church one day and it was Family Life Week. Yes, it was Family Life Week. I think the coordinator was Elder Niaman Kratete. If you are listening to this, shout outs to you. He was he brought a lady who was, I don't know if she was a psychologist, I can't really remember, but the lady was talking about her daddy issues and the trauma that she had when she was young. And she had a physically abusive father. Mine, it was a one-time, I would say it was a one-time abuse. The whip or the belt didn't even get to me, but what my brain couldn't process the fact that somebody I loved so much, you know, would do something like that or behave in such a way towards me. So yeah, let me just make that distinction. For her father was physically abusive, very, very abusive. Her story was crazy. She was talking about how her father, you know, built his ego from physically abusing them. I don't remember if her mom was also involved, but this is what the lady was saying, that her father would beat them so hard that you would have to beg him to stop. And your begging him to stop was what built his ego. That was what he was doing to them as children. So she decided to challenge her father, that one day if the father would beat them, she would withstand and not beg him. So it so happened that there was an incident of that sort, that the father was beating her and she was resisting. She just stood there and the man was shipping her with a belt. She said the father was shipping her with a belt, continually shipping her with a belt, until I think she said the man got so angry that the child was challenging him. She was resistant, that she started using the hook. And I think she said it was the mother that told her that if she doesn't move, the father was going to beat her to death. And when she was describing it, that was when the whole memory checked up, and then the whole memory came up. I remembered everything. I remembered the whole scene and what happened. So that day in church, while sitting and then in the congregation, I was crying. I was crying like crazy. I cried. I thank God so very much that I had the right person sitting beside me. Richie, wherever you are, thank you very much for that day, because he was trying to get me out because I was crying, and then it was loud and people were hearing, and then people were around me were asking like, what is wrong with her? Why is she crying? And then Richie was like, Ajua, let's go out? And I told him no, because I was trying to fight my tears. I didn't want to go out. I was trying to fight my tears. I didn't want to, one thing about crying is that if you are crying and then you are trying to fight your tears, that is when the tears, it flows more. So he was like, okay, just know that I'm here. You can be free. Just know that I'm here. So I was crying, and then after church, I was still sitting there because I get very embarrassed when people see me cry. I get very, very embarrassed. So when church closed, I was still sitting there and then I was still crying. And he sat by me until I was ready to get up. I was so lucky to have him with me that day. And remembering that was 2018. Yeah, I would say 2019, 2018, 2019, I would say. Yeah. So all throughout that period, the climax of my healing was, I would say, May 2024. This year. I woke up one morning. I was actually fasting. I was on a fast for quite a number of days, about a month, and then I woke up one morning and then God was dropping into my spirit low self-esteem, low self-esteem, low self-esteem. And then I was wondering, what is it, God? What are you trying to tell me? That was when I got the whole picture of how I had suffered from dissociative amnesia, how I had suffered from repression. And then God opened me up to the fact that the devil who comes to steal, kill, and destroy used that door. It was a portal for him to inflict me with the spirit of mental abuse and the spirit of low self-esteem. And that was why that very morning he was telling me that. And then throughout the fast, I would say that God was, whenever I prayed, I would feel like something had lifted off of my mind. There was something lifting off of my mind every day of the fast that I was praying. And I didn't understand, but I felt there was this relief in my mind. It was like an irrigation. Whenever I knelt down to pray, the first word that came into my mind was irrigation. I had this, God was irrigating my mind, just sweeping, and then there was a burden that had lifted off of my mind, but I didn't know what it was. I wasn't getting it. I didn't know what it was. And that was how I came to understand that all the time that I was told I was dull. I remember sometimes my brother would tease me with a wabong, say stuff like that. And it would get to me, but I thought I had to be tough to withstand it. So I wasn't really talking about it. And I didn't realize that this was mental abuse. And the spirit of mental abuse was inflicting me in that manner. And I had low self-esteem because when I was young, I was smart, and then it got to a time where I wasn't that person anymore. It was really affecting me. It developed into low self-esteem. And one thing about the enemy is that he uses pain, something painful you have gone through, he uses it to inflict more pain. He uses it as a portal to inflict more pain on you. That is just how the enemy works. And so this was a period that God was opening me up entirely to what happened and then healing me from it. So let me tell you how God started healing me. The Holy Spirit started telling me beautiful things about myself that I didn't know. It was like God was telling me, this is how I made you. This is your makeup. So I would, when I started having a personal relationship with God, when I started hearing God audibly, there were times I would look into the mirror and then the Holy Spirit would tell me, you are very beautiful. He started telling me nice stuff like that. He started telling me, you are worthy. He started telling me how mentally strong I am because I am his child and he made me. So God started administering fatherhood to me, the fatherhood of God. And I started relying on God as a father. That is when I started seeing him as he's really my father, like fully, like a full father, a balanced father, everything that a child would need in a father. And you see, a little is said about how a dysfunctional father-child relationship, a non-functional, and then an absent father-child relationship affects our relationship with God. Because I was brought up, or I was trained, my spiritual orientation about God when I was young was that God is, this supreme being. That was what I was actually taught. That the impression I got of him, let me put it that way, was that he was a supreme being that, if you do what is wrong, he will just open up the ground and then the ground will swallow you up. I remember in my message, Falling in Love with God, I was emphasizing this very, very much. But getting to, or letting go, opening up myself to let God love me as a father, did a lot of changes. I had to learn how to, like I said, let God love me. I had to learn how to be a child again, go back to that little child I was again, and let God, go before God as a child and be happy and be bubbly like a girl who had no worry. And then understand that my father is the Superman that he is. He's all powerful and he will take care of everything, and I wouldn't even have to lift up a finger. That is how the fatherhood of God is. Because if your father is absent from your life, it tends to create this void. You have God, but you are worried. You have God, but you feel like he's not sufficient. He's not enough. Because your earthly father was never enough. Like he wasn't whole for you. Let me put it that way. He wasn't there for you. So you have God, but you are worried. You have God, but you don't know how to open up. You don't know how to relax and accept that God will take care of literally everything. And that is how God has dealt with me, or taken care of me, when I started seeing him from an intimacy perspective and then building a relationship with him and then seeing him as a father. And I think normally on Father's Day, there is this picture that usually circulates around. You would see a a father, it's mostly a father, this father that has his child at his back and then wraps the child up, and then there's another child and then he's bathing the child in a bathtub. And it is so admirable, it is so beautiful, it depicts a beautiful, scene of fatherhood. And then I realized that God is that and more. I never had that with my father, but God is that and more to me, such that he bats me. And your earthly father, if he's present in your life and has loved you adequately as God intended for him to love you, he can only bath your outward, your physical, he can only bath your skin, the external parts of you. But the fatherhood of God is such that he does not only bath the external parts of you, but he also baths the internal parts of you. That he baths your mind, he baths your soul. When your soul is wounded, your soul being your mind, your will, and your emotions, he baths it. He's the father who baths me inside and out. And he baths away my pain, he baths away the trauma, the shame, the wounds, and then he binds you up. The Bible says he binds us, let me get the word right, he binds us up and then he heals our broken wounds. In Psalms, David talks about how God should purge us. He was asking God to purge us with hyssop that will become white as snow. But he baths us in his blood. In the new covenant, he baths us with blood and he cleanses us, like a father would see his child falls to the ground and then he would run to the child and then pick the child up and then clean the child up. That is what God literally does. And on our physical body, he baths away, how our internal pain has affected our looks. He baths the creases, the crumbs, and then the frown off of our face by making his face to shine upon us. So I always say that there is no better serum, there's no better facial moisturizing lotion, there's no better facial treatment than the face of God shining on you, because it wipes away the pain that has reflected on your face. I have experienced the fatherhood of God, and it is just so beautiful that God, his signature is on every cell in my body. He is my father because he made me, and the Bible says he knitted us in the womb. And he's really my father who knitted me, because his signature is imprinted on every cell of my body. I know my father, and I have bragging rights. I have nothing to show in this life than Jesus Christ and him crucified. I am entitled to brag about him because I know him. He's my father, and he has administered fatherhood to me. So my first Adam, like the first Adam failed, my first Adam, the first man I saw, the first fatherly figure, the first manly figure I knew failed. But Jesus Christ finished the work, and then he has administered to me personally his love. And this goes out to somebody who lost their father their father died at an early age. They never got to know what it means to have a father. That God is a father entirely, fully. And I remember last year, I released the message, The Goodness of God. And when God was, the Holy Spirit was teaching me this message, giving me point to point who God was. God is kind, God is compassionate. The Holy Spirit said, I'm a present father. I'm not an absent father. Yes, that's what God told me. He told me I'm a present father. I'm not your absent father who left, because your earthly father has limitations. He has inadequacies. He can even die like he was never part of your life. But I'm the one who never leaves you nor forsake you. I am always with you. You may not see me physically, but I'm with you. And I feel him with me all the time. And one of the most beautiful things I've experienced with God, when I was young, I was running in church one day, and then I asked God something. I asked God a question. I said, God, why do we do things this way? I was very young. I was just running in the church grounds, and I was very curious. I was asking God, God, why is it that we do things this way? And then all of a sudden, there was an overwhelming presence that overshadowed me. I was very, very young. And I remember I stood. And while standing, there was this overwhelming presence over me. And it was such an intense, pure peace. I don't know how to describe it, but it was such a feeling. And he didn't talk. As I'm talking about it, it's like I'm reminiscing what really happened. He didn't really talk, but the presence spoke like an atmosphere that was saying to me, I am with you. And I remember very well, I ran off with this happiness. I ran off laughing. I was very happy with this confidence that my Father is with me. And I hit rock bottom. I remember I was doing my national service, and then I was broke. I was asking God so many questions, and then God reminded me of that memory. He said, do you remember when you were a child? You were running at church, and then my presence visited you. I visited you, and then I told you that I'm always with you. And not only that, when I grew up, one day I was praying, and I closed my eyes to pray, and then I saw Jesus. I didn't see him very clearly, but the face I saw was, he's such a gentleman. Jesus is so gentle. He is such a gentleman. I saw him, and then he was boasting, bragging about me to the angels. He said, look at my daughter. That's my daughter over there. Like, I am so proud of her. I am so very proud of her. And I had a vision one time. I was on my knees praying. Most of these encounters, it comes when I'm praying. I was praying, and then I saw God. He always comes, with another image. But I saw him, and then he lifted me and put me on his laps. And then he wrapped his arms around me, and then he said, I love you so very much. So I will not say I have experienced. I am living. I have lived. I am living, and then my whole life flows out of the fatherhood of God, because I've had personal experiences with him. He's my friend, and his sense of humor is just out of this world. Because he wanted to build that friendship, he wanted to build that rapport with me, that casual relationship, like your friend who sits with you and then you are always laughing and then gisting together. There are times God could tease me. When I started talking to God personally about personal stuff, I told God about a guy I had a crush on. I tell God about stuff like that. And then one day I saw the guy, and then God was like, that is your crush. He was teasing me. And I'm like, wait, you are supposed to be God. You shouldn't be teasing me about things like that. And then he said, but it's true. That is your crush. It is so beautiful. It is so beautiful, and it is something that every human being should experience. There is a gap so peculiar. There is a gap in everybody's life, everybody's heart, everybody's soul. So wide, so peculiar that it takes the size of God only to fill. Nobody can fill it. No human being can fill that space. It is only God. He's the only one who can fill it. And I thank God that I am healed. I didn't hate my father. No. People tried so hard for me to hate him. My biological father, I'm talking. He's the one I'm talking about, my earthly father. I never hated him. I don't know. And I thank God so much that it never impacted my relationship with men negatively. It never happened. And I am so thankful to God for that. And I thank God for healing me. I thank God for that relief I can feel in my mind. That God has restored me. That there is no longer a brain fog in my mind. There's no longer the state where I feel, I'm mentally exhausted. I struggle concentrating. I have a low sense of urgency or delayed reaction. I'm no longer dull. God has healed me, and He wants to reach out to you too. Especially somebody who has experienced trauma of any sort, because these things come about not just by physical abuse, sexual abuse, constant verbal abuse, emotional abuse. All of these things can cause this dissociative disorder. So I'm going to go into details about this. So dissociative disorder is a mental health condition whereby there is a loss of connection between your thoughts, your feelings, your environment, things and people around you, occurrences in your life. That is what dissociative disorder is about. And there are 3 types of dissociative disorder. There is the depersonalization or derealization. We have the dissociative amnesia. That is what I went through or what happened with me. And then there is dissociative identity disorder. So the depersonalization or derealization is when you start disconnecting from reality. The depersonalization is when people feel like they are outside of themselves. They see themselves, acting or performing things, going through life, but they feel like they are outside of themselves. You get it? And then there is this state of derealization, like you are outside of reality. You start seeing things like it goes hand in hand, because it's almost as though you are living outside of yourself. You see things happening that are not real. Yeah, that is that. The depersonalization and then derealization. And then we have the dissociative identity disorder. It is the type that is called multiple identity disorder. If you've heard multiple identity disorder, it is the same thing. So it comes about, or it's manifest such that you feel like you are 2 people, like one person who feels that he or she has 2 personalities, that he can live a certain way at a certain point in time, and then the next minute he or she is a different person. You get it? You can associate it, or it has some similarities with bipolar, but it is not the same. Like, for example, somebody can be a priest, like I'm a priest. Somebody with dissociative identity disorder, that is what I'm talking about, can be one moment believing that he or she is a priest, let's say a nun, something of that sort, and then the next moment he or she sees herself to be a philosopher, like two personalities. He or she switches between two personalities at the same time. There are stories about how people, you know, can have two families and then be given excuses, can switch anytime, going back and forth with both families. Things like that happen. For some people, it is intentional, but for some people, it can be attributed to dissociative identity disorder. What I experienced was dissociative amnesia, extreme memory loss that comes about as a result of a traumatic incident or a traumatic occurrence that was too much for the brain to handle, so it flashes it out. Memory loss. But what all of these three have in common is that they come about as a result of a traumatic issue, a traumatic stress, or something that the brain couldn't handle, and then there was a twitching somewhere, and then it led to the person experiencing depersonalization, derealization, or dissociative identity disorder. And it doesn't really have medical treatment, but it can be resolved by talking therapy, being in therapy, getting somebody, a therapist, who can, you know, go back to what really happened, can engage you, and then get you to open up and then trace things to how it came about, that traumatic experience that this person went through that brought about this issue. Yeah, it happens a lot that people are, you know, raped, people are abused, intense use, subject people to torture, and then it alters their thinking faculties, or it alters their brain. The brain physically, the brain as a physical organ reacts to trauma. It alters it in a way. Yes, it occurs like that. It happens like that. And people, you know, have unhealthy habits that we see them exhibit, and then sometimes you may, you know, call somebody a bad child, or, you know, label somebody, but it might be as a result of something traumatic that happened to them that hasn't been resolved, that is, you know, leading or causing the person to behave in a manner that is known or seen as inappropriate. Yeah, but never undermine therapy, as I'm talking about the fact that God has healed me. When I got the whole picture, there were a couple of people that I confided in about it, that some gave me good advice, some didn't, but maybe God realized that I couldn't talk about it much, so he did his work with me and healed me. But I would never undermine therapy. I would never look down on that, because it is much needed. God has equipped people with knowledge in engaging people, therapeutic talk, and then they are able to help them heal or resolve it. So yeah, that is my story. Other stories that there is to share, as God will permit, I am going to talk about them. But join me, thank God for healing, and I pray that anybody who has encountered a traumatic experience would see this message and then be healed from it, because God is that capable. This is Anna. I'm glad to come your way always. Guys, subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, guys. Follow me on all social media platforms: TikTok, Threads, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It's Anna Ministries. God bless you guys. Have a good weekend.